we know how to get along with each other. But actually, we never thought about it. We just kind of jumped into a system where nobody had ever thought about it. And everybody's just kind of copying everybody else imperfectly. And then sometimes people are just getting really mad because the patterns they thought were there are not there. It's not as though the Socratic solution to this problem is going to mean that you do it in the right order. There's no hope of doing it in the right order, because by the time you're old enough to inquire, you've been fed a bunch of stuff, right, by your culture. So it is going to be a matter of inquiring into stuff you've already come to accept.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Axis, a very special episode when the philosopher Agnes Callard and I are both wearing stripes. We nearly changed so that we are both in black and white stripes when we realized this coincidence, but then concluded that we would look like the Holocaust. So for those of you who are just listening to the audio, we are both wearing stripes, but Agnes's are green and I'm in black and white stripes. And this we did not coordinate. This is just how fellow Hungarians show up to a podcast. And on that note, actually, I should call you Agi, right? If we're
I was never called Agi. I was called Agnieszka by my father, or even sometimes Agika, but never Agi, because you know why? My aunt was Agi, and so
my grandmother was Agika, but only when she did something wrong, which was a lot because she was a gossip. So when you were mad at her, she was Agika. In any other case, you would be very, like full of reverence for her, and she would be Agnes. So, right. Agika for me has this like dual effect of endearing, but also it means that somebody is really mad at somebody else. The kids should go into the room and just stay out of this. Agnes, welcome to the podcast. I believe this is my 26th episode, but I kind of lost track at around 15. So my previous episode with Rohit Krishnan, I just said the wrong number. It's fine. We're here to celebrate your book, Open Socrates, The Case for a Philosophical Life. I'm one of the thousands of people who participated in the poll that both determined your glasses that you're wearing right now. And I was in the small group that voted for this. And you said that even if a few people are right, that's better. I think there was this quote about how cool I am choosing that pair of glasses. So I'm very happy about that. And also the title of this book, I voted for this title.
Awesome.
You might be the only person who listens to me in this world. I'm so happy. Everybody else, I have to employ them, to do the Adam Smith thing that you quote, that people really want to be able to persuade others. Okay. Your book has a very, very memorable opening line, which I'm going to read up. You say, or opening paragraph, you say, there's a question you are avoiding. Even now, as you read this sentence, you're avoiding it. You tell yourself you don't have time at the moment. You're focused on making it through the next 15 minutes. There's a lot to get done in a day. There are the hours you spend at your job, the chores to take care of at home. There are movies to be seen, books to be read, music to be listened to, friendships to catch up on, vacations to be taken. Your life is full. It has no space for the question, why am I doing any of this? When I read this, I thought, I ask this of myself all the time. Why is that? But why is that? Why do some people ask these questions, what you call untimely questions, load-bearing questions, and why do some people not?
So I think that one thing that I argue in the book is that you kind of can't pose those questions to yourself and inquire into the question by yourself. So in a way, what I want to say is nobody asked themselves these questions. But I want to acknowledge that there's a surface difference between people who say things to themselves like, why am I doing any of this? And people who don't say those words to themselves. And I guess I think that sometimes why am I doing any of this is just a kind of expression of anxiety. So like anxious people are going to say that to themselves more. But another thing that it might be is a way of marking to yourself a kind of openness. Like, look, if I were to stumble into the right sort of conversation, I would try to pursue this inquiry.
What makes you a Socratic person? How did it start? What was the first question?
Okay, so me in particular, or one in general?
I would love to know what makes you, Agnes, a Socratic person.
I think that, I read the Socratic dialogues first in high school, and eventually, not immediately when I read them, but eventually, I just became really shocked by the possibility of this other way of living that was like, it was like every human being throughout history made one assumption about what it is to be human and to live your life. And then there was this guy, and he just did it a different way. Um, and it was like, why did he think he was allowed to do it in this other way? Um, and what was it? What made it so different from how everybody else was living? Uh, and like fundamentally, it was just that he didn't assume that he knew the answers to a bunch of things that everybody else assumed they knew the answer to. And um, and I think that I was really impressed that that was actually a way you could live, like that it wasn't just a posture you could take, but it could infuse everything you did. Um, and I think that that's, um, I tell the story in the book that like my initial response to that was to sort of be academic about it. I read the dialogues, I took classes in the dialogues, I read Aristotle, I learned Greek, I studied Greek history. I would write papers explaining the Socratic dialogues, and because I kind of felt, well, maybe that's how I get close to this thing. But it was not satisfying to me because I felt like, well, I don't just want to sort of talk about Socrates. I want to be Socrates. And all of this scholarly stuff is not making me be him. Um, and I think really ever since then, I have kind of been trying to do that, to like, what would it be to be him now? My first pass at it, which is a story I tell in the book, was like I went to the Art Institute at I was a student at the University of Chicago, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go be Socrates. I should go to the place in Chicago that is similar to the Agora in Athens, which is like the steps in front of the Art Institute. That's where people hang out. And so I went there and I tried to do the Socratic thing. I tried to go up to people and, I would ask them first, like, okay, do you want to have a philosophical conversation? And then if they said yes, which most of them did, I would ask them, like, what is art, or what is the meaning of life? And I thought it was going to be this Socratic inquiry. I thought that like what happened in Plato is going to happen to me. And that's just not at all what happened. It completely failed because the people I talked to had no idea what I was doing. They were kind of confused. They thought I was maybe trying to sell them something. It was coming eventually, but they were very wary. They were kind of scared of me, and they wanted to get away from me. And it turns out that you kind of can't do this kind of guerrilla tactic, springing philosophy on people. It like kind of like almost like candid camera type thing. It just doesn't work. I mean, you might have thought maybe it would work, but then as I have experienced, it doesn't work. And so you have to try other tactics. You have to make people want to talk to you.
There's a really funny part. I think it's at the beginning of the book when you talk about how even philosophers are not very philosophical. Like even academic philosophers, they think like, oh, it's kind of my work. And then I go home, and then philosophy stays at the university or at the editorial office or wherever they work. And you think that that's a scandal. Like that's not how one should live. So I'm really curious, when you go to another philosopher's house, do you try to make it more philosophical? Like, do you have a personal ambition to make homes more philosophical if the people living there claim to be philosophers?
So, the thing that I learned really from this initial experience at the Art Institute more than anything else is you really can't force philosophy on people. It just doesn't work. So if I were to go to people's homes and be like, okay, we're gonna do some philosophy now, this is not going to work. But I have to say, I don't go to other philosophers' homes that often. But what I do very often is go out to dinner with other philosophers. And I absolutely do this at dinners, right? I am trying to nudge the conversation in a philosophical direction. And, often I get batted away a few times and I pull back, and there's a kind of negotiation that happens beneath the surface.
And they are like, no, 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 I'm not at work right now. I don't want to do this.
Exactly. But I was just at a conference in Quebec City, and there was a philosopher there Michael Bratman. He's a very well-known philosopher in my field. And he turned out, I didn't know him at all, but he just turned out to be somebody who you're at a dinner and all he wants to do is talk philosophy. He's an exception. Okay. Which I only learned by like actually trying it. And it was like amazing. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And there's nothing about his work or his reputation or anything that where I could have predicted that this would be true of him. It was like finding a treasure trove. Anyway, this is a message to all of
Why is it so
this is a message to all of your listeners.
Okay.
If you're ever at a dinner and you have a chance to talk to Michael Bratman, just seize it.
Why is it so rare? Is it because it's exhausting to be Socratic? It sounds very exhausting from the dialogues. It sounds like
I think it is a bit exhausting. So like
even they eat and drink, at the symposium and get some refreshments because it's hard work.
They don't. So Socrates makes them not do so much of those things, right? So he basically says, like, no, we're not going to party. We're going to do philosophy. We're not going to. So normally they drink a lot more, and he makes them hold back on the drinking, right? So he's a bit of a spoil sport. I think yes. So yes, part of it is that it's just tiring, and that often you're at a dinner and it's like the end of a long day. I'm tired too. I find myself kind of almost sometimes slipping with relief into a pointless conversation. So when I feel that that's what my interlocutor wants, it's like, well, now I have an excuse, So I think there is that, but I also think that there is like maybe philosophy is a kind of a dangerous profession, not in the sense that people want to kill you, but in the sense that like you could sort of fall into a bunch of bottomless pits. And I think as you are going through your education, you sort of learn to protect yourself from it. You build up walls of real life. Not everybody does, but like not everybody succeeds in the profession either. And there's probably a correlation.
I mean, to be fair, when I ask myself, why am I doing things? It's often with other people. Like, I just really like to probe the foundations. I definitely think I don't know anything, so this is perfect. But I think this kind of takes us also to the untimely question. I can do this because I don't have kids. I don't own property. I don't have a mortgage. I run my own company. I am just starting to write my book, so I can still change what I'm writing about. I'm not knee deep in any water yet. In the sense that many people are. And I understand that later on, questions become more and more untimely often. At the same time, why would you know in advance what the right question will be? You often I only found out what the real question about interintellect are years into it, right? What did I know? I had no idea at the beginning. Now, 8 years in, I understand what it is. And now I have actual load-bearing questions. I kind of want to wade into the untimely questions territory. And if you allow me, I will read up another part just to introduce the topic. You say this is where you will contrast Tolstoy and Socrates in a very important way and talk about the value of thinking together. When I saw you at the Brooklyn Library a couple of weeks ago, you joked that imagining what somebody would respond to your great questions is not the same as actually asking them. Now I had to rethink my whole life because I do that a lot. But let's go to your book. You say, I believe that Tolstoy identified a special class of question that I'm going to call untimely questions. An untimely question is a question that comes at the wrong time, namely after it has been answered. Untimely questions are remarkable not only because they are hard to answer, but first and foremost, because they are hard to ask. And they are hard to ask not only because it is hard to pose them to others, but first and foremost, because it is hard to pose them to oneself. What was going on with Tolstoy? I also love Tolstoy, so I was so happy that you opened your book with him. What was wrong with him? What broke Tolstoy?
I mean, in a weird way, nothing. It was something that was right with him. That is, he noticed a really like deep and troubling fact about life, and that's what broke him. And William James has a nice description that I quote somewhere in the book that I don't remember off the top of my head, but that basically says, look, if the rest of us kind of can face the sort of facts that Tolstoy adverts to with equanimity, that doesn't say something good about us. It says something bad about us. We should have all wished that we were more like him. That's sort of James's response, which is to say he was sort of profoundly disturbed by something that is profoundly disturbing. And what that was that there were questions on which the sort of meaning of his life depended, that he found he could make no progress inquiring into. That is, as soon as he tried to ask himself the questions, he was like, there's no answer. So like, what's the meaning of life? Why should I try to write novels? Why should I care about the education of my children, etc.? Sort of the fundamental questions that directed him in his everyday pursuits. He realized that the answers that he had given were not anything he could justify or explain. They weren't arrived at by thinking. And when he tried to arrive at answers by thinking, the impossibility of doing so immediately struck him.
So here is a man, he's in his 50s or he's 50.
I think he's just 50, yeah.
He's 50, so proper midlife crisis. He is super well known because he has written Anna Karenina, he has written War and Peace, he has a wife that he loves, who loves him, he has good children, and a bunch of land that he enjoys cultivating, and it's very profitable for him. And at some point, he completely loses the will to live, basically, and actually contemplates suicide because he sees the whole endeavor as utterly pointless. And then we kind of move on from his story into the story of Socrates, who had a similar kind of midlife crisis, but him being Socrates went down very differently. So here's a guy who's very ugly for the taste of the age, right? And also doesn't care about kind of external beauty at all. Is married to this woman, humble origins, right? Stonecutter's son. How was his midlife crisis different, and what should we learn from that? I'm in my midlife. I'm approaching midlife, so this is very personal for me. I want to know.
So, we don't actually have anything from Socrates like an account of the moment when he turned to face these questions. The story that we have is the story of his friend Chaerephon going to the oracle and asking the oracle, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? And the oracle says no. And Socrates is like, that must be wrong. And so he goes and he starts refuting people. This is the story Socrates. So this is Socrates' own story about how I became Socrates. It's like the, Spider-Man, like I was just an ordinary guy. And then one day I was bit by a radioactive spider. Socrates is like, I was just an ordinary guy. And then one day Chaerephon went and asked the oracle. There's something fishy about Socrates' story, which is that if Socrates wasn't already special, why did Chaerephon ask, is there anyone wiser than Socrates, right? So something is not right about this story. But also not just that part, the other part that's very weird is that, imagine if sort of a representative of God decides that you're special. You're not like everybody else. You have a secret genius. You have a special kind of unique insight into the truth and into the way things are. Most people, if they are told something like this, they're just ready to eat that up. That's what we've all been wanting to hear our whole lives. The Harry Potter moment where you get this letter that says you're not a regular boy, you're a wizard boy.
The hero's journey.
Exactly.
Call to adventure. Yeah.
Exactly. And Socrates rejects it. He's just like, no, I'm regular. And his weird adventure turns out to be the adventure of proving that he's just a regular guy. And, in the proving of it, he kind of becomes an extraordinary person in being unwilling to accept that anything that he has could count as knowledge. And I think that as he goes about this proof that the oracle is wrong, right? That's what he's trying to do, is prove the oracle is wrong. I think he finds that he is, first of all, it's failing in the sense that the oracle is turning out to be right, and he's learning. Like he's learning things as he's refuting people. For one thing, he's learning the oracle was correct, but he eventually decides that this thing that he's doing is so great that if he gets put to death, and if they send him down to Hades, when he's down there in Hades, he's just going to keep doing it. He's going to be refuting Sisyphus and Odysseus, and it's going to be even amazing for him if they kill him because he can keep on going. So you get this sense that he sort of stumbles into this practice, and it's just exactly the practice that Tolstoy described as impossible. It's an inquiry into these questions by testing the answers that reputable people have been giving and showing that their answers don't work.
Good.
And what I argue in the book is that he sort of discovered that when you prove that somebody doesn't know something, that's some steps in the direction of coming to know.
Yeah.
So you're moving by refuting someone, you are inquiring.
Yeah.
And so he discovered that you actually could make progress on these questions. You could make progress exactly by showing people that what they took to be knowledge wasn't knowledge.
Yeah.
But he also has a kind of quip to the oracle's prophecy, right? That he is the wisest because the wisest is anybody who knows he doesn't know anything, which is a very nice thing. Already we are in kind of Cliffordian territory, saying a lot of really, really wise things. But one of the most interesting things to me in the book that I did not know about before that Socrates ever claimed this is that Socrates believed that every human frailty, every flaw that a person might think they have, vanity, greed, laziness, hubris, whatever, is ignorance. And not in the sense of like not having enough information, which would be a 21st century take on it, but that the cause of the flaw is not understanding. I find this quite shocking, and it made me want to sit down and kind of sit with it a little bit. What does Socrates mean by this? And is there an afterlife to this idea? Does it pop up in other philosophers of note? What's happening with this?
So there's a version of it that becomes the kind of backbone of what eventually will get called action theory, which is everyone desires the good. That is, there are two kinds of people: the kind of people who desire good things and the kind of people who desire bad things. And then the bad guys are, the ones who desired the bad things. This is an argument from the Meno, by the way, this exact thing. There's this kind of attempt to say, well, there are two kinds of people. And Socrates is like, no, there's just one kind of person, the kind that desires the good. That's the kind of person that everybody is. Once you think that everyone desires the good, then you have to say, okay, well, we all desire the same thing, but we do different things. Some of us do good things, some of us do bad things, but we all desire the good. And Socrates is like, well, the difference is made up by we know different amounts. And so we all want to be like good, moral, upstanding people. That's what everybody wants. But some people have really messed up ideas about how to get there. And that's the difference between people. And so in a certain way, so the part where everyone desires the good, that gets preserved. And it gets preserved because it actually has this kind of truistic force. Like, I desired to like slap this wall or something, right? And you say to me, well, then, I mean, you must see something good in slapping the wall, like maybe the loud sound you're going to make, or maybe there's a bug on the wall, or maybe you need a philosophy example, right? But there's something good about it. And it would be in seeing the good of what I'm doing that you would even understand my choice to slap the wall. Suppose I'm like, no, really, there's nothing good about it. There's no value in slapping the wall. I don't see anything good. I'm not achieving anything by doing it. But I am going to slap the wall. Then you might think, okay, well, maybe she has some kind of disorder that forces her to slap the wall, that makes her arm move against her own will, right? And so that's where you start to see there's actually a conceptual connection between seeing some behavior as the object of choice and seeing it as directed in some sense at the good. Now, what happens after Socrates and Plato with Aristotle is the idea, okay, maybe you think it's good, but that doesn't mean it is good. That is, maybe it's directed at something like the apparent good. And your conception, your kind of picture of what appears good could be really, really wrong. And so it still could be that your desire is in some sense mistaken, because what appears to you to be good is so far from the good that it's your desire that's in some sense in error. I mean, it's a kind of post-Socratic innovation. I think there are Socratic responses to it. But I think that, the version, this is sometimes called the sub specie boni thesis, because in Latin, it's a Latin translation of under the guise of the good, that we all act under the guise of the good. So you might think, okay, maybe we can weaken the thesis to the point where it doesn't let us conclude that all wrongdoing is ignorance. But I think Socrates has got some rejoinders there. And so it actually looks like this crazy Socratic view that all wrongdoing is ignorance kind of falls out of some pretty core ideas about the distinction between what it is for something to be an action versus mere behavior.
Definitely something I think for a lot of people to think about. Just listeners, viewers, take this home with you. What misunderstanding might lie underneath anything that you consider a flaw. And when you try to change it, maybe with, behavioral methods or mindfulness or changing your biochemistry, maybe a good first step before all of those other steps would be to just ask yourself, is there something I don't understand that would be worth inquiring about with other people?
Right. So there's some fun consequences of this view, which is that like all punishment should be replaced by education.
You talk about this with regard to parenting in the book, which really was a thought-provoking note for me, where you say that we don't really have the talk with our children about most things, right? We have the big talk about drugs and sex and whatever, and how mommy and puppy met, but we don't really have big talks about simple behaviors. We wait for them to happen, and then it's punitive or corrective, whatever parenting we do. And of course, the children will respond with resistance. Do you think that's the same in like marriage, an adult relationship, co-working situations? How should we think about that?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. I think that quite generally, it seems to me that the way that we operate with norms is we wait for them to be violated and then we do something. An interesting partial counterexample is conversation. So I've just been reading a lot lately on sort of sociology of conversation. And like, as we're talking, you're giving me a lot of positive signals that you're following me, that you're understanding what I'm saying. And I too do the same. Like you asked me this question about this passage, right? And in my response to you, I did a thing that sociologists call next turn proof procedure, which means in my next turn, after I talk, I try to show the person who spoke in the previous turn that I understood what they said by means of the content, right? So you had the sense that the question I was answering was your question. And I had to do work. I couldn't just start talking. I have to kind of, in some way, restate or refer to the things you say. Okay, so these are the ways in which, in conversation, we are actually kind of constantly checking, like, are we on the same page? Are we following each other? But even there, I think there's a lot of room for repair, right? So I'm not going to do anything until I see some expression on your face or some puzzlement or whatever that suggests, okay, there was something I didn't explain clearly, or I contradicted myself or something, and then I need to fix what I was saying. If you had a transcript of this conversation, you would see, actually, I'm sure that over the course of what I was just saying, there were repairs. That is, I didn't smoothly form a sentence from beginning to end. I went back, I jumped back, I just did it. I went back, I jumped back, right? Okay. So, so the kind of constant correction, right? A constant attempt at doing the thing a little bit better. So conversation's a really interesting case because we do a lot of both positive reinforcement, you're doing it right, I'm understanding you, and a lot of correcting.
Is it correcting or is it redundancy?
I think it's correcting often.
Okay, so we don't like pre-fill the sentence, because in linguistics you have the theory that there's the redundancy, right? So you try to prevent misunderstandings, and so you just fill every sentence with a lot of completely unnecessary things. And if somebody actually speaks in a very sparse way, they come across as a total asshole. And you're like, have I done something wrong?
Good. So I think I think it's fair to say that there's quite a bit of redundancy as well. But I also think that there is people forming their ideas on the spot, and figuring out what they want to say and how much information they need to give. So I might mention someone. Let's say I'm talking, right? And I say James to you. And then I suddenly realize, wait a minute, maybe the listeners are not going to know I'm talking about William James. In the book, I also mentioned Henry James, right? And so that I might say James, I say William James, or right, I might correct, because
My name is Bond, James Bond, because you might not know me.
Exactly. Um, um, and so I think that that's, it's like we don't try in our first pass to get the perfect utterance. What we do is produce some utterance. And this is because we are trying to coordinate on meaning efficiently. That is, it's more efficient if I sort of say some stuff and then I see you've got my point and I can go on, rather than I like perfectly construct it. Okay. So I think that that's a fun fact about communication. But in general, with norms, I think, kind of assume that the people around us are in the same norm space that we are. And we don't explain or have agreements. Against that context, we can have some agreements, right? So like you and I can have an agreement about how long we're going to talk for, but like we didn't have an agreement on like how many words I'm going to say, right? Like there's a lot of things that we don't make agreements about. And so, you know, all the agreements we have are formed against the backdrop of a set of norms that we're presupposing. And we only do something about them when something goes wrong. And I think that that's very salient with parenting, because with parenting, it's like you're going to yell at your kid about not doing their homework if they don't do their homework. But otherwise, you're not going to make some speech when they first start school, kid, you got to do your homework every day. You know, it doesn't occur to you as a parent to make that speech. And like, you know, you might have one kid that just always does their homework and you never have to say anything to them. And so you just wait and see, what do I have to yell at them about? Right? And that's how you approach it, rather than starting with, what are all the things I need to teach my child?
In your work on anger, you speak so beautifully about anger being your basically like a bodily command. I think that's how it probably would be called in this book, under the savage commands category. That, you know, anger arises, say you, when you thought that we agreed on how the world works, and now I find out that we were in a disagreement all along. You're doing something that to me signals that we are not on the same page, and you respond with anger. So this reminds me of that. I spent a lot of time recently thinking about what I call untested reciprocity, where you kind of assume that the other person will do their part when we get there. And it kind of interests me because, you know, like yourself, I come from Budapest, I come from Hungarian culture, which is a favor-based culture. And if you ask me to do you a favor, I will do it, unless some major, if I don't do it, it means I hate you, right? So I will do it, obviously, to kind of have the good relations. And then, you know, if I go to you for the reciprocity, and for whatever reason you can't reciprocate, you have to. There's no way not to do it. Like if you can't do what I'm asking for, you will find some other way for us to be even, because not doing it breaks up the relationship. And then I moved to, you know, I lived in England for a long time, where I sometimes try this, like I ask for an intro, I ask for these small social favors, because, you know, I will reciprocate. Like, what are we talking about? And then you find out that it's a completely different culture. Their favor culture is called Oxford and Cambridge, and they all know each other since they were in the womb. So like, there's no way to in any way enter that, and they do their own brokering in very different ways. And then I came to America, where it kind of appears to be a favor-based culture, but fundamentally it's a very different one, where somehow reciprocation is optional. Shocked me for two reasons. first of all, because I didn't know that it was optional for me to reciprocate. So when somebody comes to me who has done me a favor earlier, I will like go out of my way and as the Hungarians say, bring the stars down from the sky. Also because I kind of like the person already, because we are kind of part of the same world now. But I found it the hard way many times that it's not at all obligatory to reciprocate. And there is this kind of weird variable reward game that Americans play with each other, which I don't fully understand yet. I mean, I moved here less than a year ago, and I started thinking about the untested reciprocity because I tend to see myself as kind of a contractualist. And, then there is this idea that kind of I arrived at, like you did in your book, that social contracts are almost always invisible until they are broken. So the first time you actually get acquainted with what this person you thought was aligned on, when you have to renegotiate it.
Right.
And if I understand your book correctly, you say that that's too late, that there has to be, the untimely questions have to be asked earlier, because it's not a healthy way of existing to only really find out. I'm bringing this up with the children's question because, I mean, having your relationship with your children is like the least put down on paper social contract you have. Like your marriage is written down, your contract with University of Chicago is written down. With your friends, you actually have some kind of an origin story of how you became friends.
Yeah.
It's even if you're not married, with your partner you have, or partners, you have some kind of a lore that is the social contract, right? Like you have a story about when you kind of sealed the deal. But with your kids, no, like you can tell them how they were born, but it's they were not willing participants, in this matter. What do you think about untested reciprocity, and what do you think your take would be on that?
Yeah, so I'll start with it. I wouldn't call it a bodily command. So in the book, I describe the sources that we have of answers to questions that we've never asked, right? Because the whole problem is we have these answers that we didn't get by asking the questions. That's their untimely questions. And what I say is that there are two of them. There are some come from your body and some come from your kinship group. And your body, that's pretty clear. It's like stuff like hunger and thirst and fear, pleasure, pain, and fear of death, and the desire for money, and so far it's going to help you secure those things, right? That's the bodily command. So these are just commands that you experience where it's like you don't feel you have a choice about whether or not you feel hungry, right? It's just your body is commanding you. Okay. And then the other one is just you're a member of a variety of groups, and those groups have a bunch of unwritten rules about how you're supposed to be, given that you're a member of those groups. And I call that the kinship command. And I basically think that anger belongs with the kinship command. So anger is a manifestation of kind of something has gone wrong with the kinship command. That is, you're in a group, you thought this is the rule that we were working with, and somebody is breaking it, which suggests it's not our rule. And
breaks it with impunity, right? And they get away with it.
Right. And so what you want is revenge. That is, you want them to suffer for what they did, because then it's not impunity. We usually call it by a different name when we are the one who wants it. So we will call it justice or accountability or them getting what they deserve or whatever, punishment.
Some kind of retribution. You want to kind of,
you want them to suffer, you want them to pay costs.
Yeah, exactly. You don't mean by revenge some kind of Garcia Lorca blood wedding where the groom rides in on with a sword. It can be like a softer version, right?
Oh, sure. Like, I think most of our revenges are quite small, like you're annoyed at your spouse, you don't do the dishes or something. So I think life is filled with little revenges that we call by other names. But so I think that it's right to say that all of these breakdown cases are a manifestation of the fact that we're kind of pretending like we got this whole socializing thing covered. Like, we know what we're doing. We know how to get along with each other. But actually, we never thought about it. We just kind of jumped into a system where nobody had ever thought about it. And everybody's just kind of copying everybody else imperfectly. And then sometimes people are just getting really mad because the patterns they thought were there are not there. So yes, I think it's not as though the Socratic solution to this problem is going to mean that, you do it in the right order. There's no hope of doing it in the right order, because you have to, by the time you're old enough to inquire, you've been fed a bunch of stuff, right, by your culture. And so it is going to be a matter of inquiring into stuff you've already come to accept. But yes, I think that there is the possibility of saying, as, say, Socrates and Crito get into this conversation of what are the rules we actually want to live by? What are the agreements we actually want to make with each other or with our society? And you could ask this question about favors and reciprocity. And I think, I can see a case to be made for the Hungarian norm, but I also see a pretty good case to be made against the Hungarian norm. Namely, um, it it sort of threatens to replace friendship with something like mutual favor giving, right? Where it's like, well, they did you a favor, so now you'd better do them a favor. You may or may not like them, right? But you don't want to be in bad relations with them. And so it sort of sets up these dependencies, and where the question, do I actually like this person or want to spend time with them, fades into the background. And so like, I think there's just some good questions here about what are the better norms to have. That is, it's certainly true that, under certain circumstances, you should just help someone because they're in need for no reason at all, right? And so now you get the American norm, right? Look, if somebody is in need, you should help them, regardless of whether they're going to help you back later, whatever. They're owed your help if they are in need. And you shouldn't help them because later they will help you or something. You should just help them because they're in need. If they're not in need, well, then are they your friend or not? If they're not already your friend, you don't have to help them. And the thought, well, I'll help them now because then maybe they'll help me later, that's the exact move by which you kind of replace something like friendship with something else.
I think I'm not arguing for the Hungarian system. I left for a reason, but I think the argument there is that friendship, true love, familial vibes take you out of the system of transactionality.
Mm-hmm.
So the transactional favor culture is the weak ties.
Right.
So the neighbor, the colleague, the professor, whatever your life, wherever you live your life, where it's kind of a prelude to friendship or love or other forms of engagement, where you suspend this, right? It's not replacing. And I think when it comes to actual altruism and helpfulness, other than the United Kingdom, everywhere I've been in my life, it was a basic rules. I think the golden rule works everywhere. And if somebody's in need, you help. And if you're in need, they will help. But definitely the weak ties work. And I think I am able to kind of observe this because these are the weak ties, where everything is so much more legible than with your closest relationships, where entanglements are just much more complicated. I would like to move on to the load-bearing answers part, because we talked so much about what you call kind of the first part of the Socratic method, which is the creative destruction of somebody's certainties and their kind of sense of being in a kind of arrived state in life, and then Socrates enters and that feeling goes away. And then there's the kind of reconstruction, the palliative care afterwards. How should we think about load-bearing questions and load-bearing answers, and what do you mean by that?
So, I mean, in a way, we have already been discussing them because, when it's untimely questions, the answers come first. So the load-bearing answers are at the very beginning of the story. The story starts with the answers. And when I was giving these two kind of commands, the bodily command and the kinship command, those are the two kinds of answers that there are. That is, those are the two kinds of answers that we can have sort of for free without inquiring. So if you're like, what should I do? Then your body gives you a load-bearing answer. Eat when it's hungry, right? It's like, you just get this answer. And that answer can then support the weight of your agency, right? So you can eat on the grounds that you're hungry. And one of the things that I observe is that, especially when it comes to the kinship ones, these load-bearing answers are load-bearing in the sense that when they get taken away from you, you experience that as some kind of a crisis. So we discussed one way they can get taken away, which is that somebody can violate, a kind of, you thought we were giving this answer together, and then this person is not doing that. That's one way. But another way that can happen is like, there might be someone where, let's say, engaging with, caring for, being part of the life of this person is just part of the answer you were giving yourself. What is my life? How do I live? I live with this person, and then they die. And now all of a sudden it's like your answer was taken away, right? So you're like, what should I do? And people in that position get depressed. They sort of feel like they don't know what to do. They don't have an answer. The answer is gone. And the answer wasn't one that they could come up with from their own resources. They got it for free. And when it's taken away, it doesn't just get replaced by something else. So part of what I mean by load bearing is that your agency, all the stuff you do, all the energy that you have for doing anything rests on these answers just being given to you.
You talk extensively about three big philosophical schools. The Kantians, right, who in your understanding come from Stoicism, if I understand correctly. You talk about utilitarians who come from the Epicurean school, and virtue ethics, Aristotle. And you kind of try to show us that whilst we can, thank utilitarians for economics, and probably Kantians for the scientific method, I don't even know where to go there, Aristotle for psychology, these are extremely forced generalizations. You find them kind of lacking in good questions. Is it because they come with the answers first?
Basically, yes. So the story that I want to tell is that, Socrates saw that we had these two kinds of answers that we get for free from your body and from the group of people that you belong to. And he criticized them. He said, these are not very good answers. Look at the one from your body. Your body tells you, eat another cookie, eat another cookie. And then a little bit later, it tells you shouldn't have eaten another cookie. Now you have a stomach ache, right? Your kinship group tells you, oh, here are the people that you love. And then they break some rule and now you want to hurt them. So these answers they have a tendency to self-destruct. And so Socrates thought that, well, that means we should try to find a different source of answers. Instead of just taking any kind of answers for granted, we should just ask the question and figure out what we should do. But after Socrates died, there were a bunch of philosophical schools that sprung up. And some of these schools were kind of motivated by the thought, this is how I'm telling the story, not so fast, Socrates, we can fix them. We can fix those bad answers. We don't need to ask the question, because we can take, let's say, the command of your body and the idea, pursue pleasure, avoid pain. And, it's true. If you just pursue immediately what's pleasant to you at a given moment, your life's going to be screwed. But if you do some kind of a hedonic calculus and you look at what's pleasant over time and you forego the present pleasure for a greater future pleasure and all of that, and then you understand even that some higher goods like friendship can be understood in terms of pleasure, then you can perfectly well live your whole life just under the bodily command. That's what ancient Epicureanism was. And, in the 19th century, you get this group of thinkers, John Stuart Mill most saliently, but also Bentham and then later Sidgwick, who are basically reviving. They say, we are modern day Epicureans. And they say, look, that was pretty good, but we're going to systematize it a little bit more. For one thing, it's going to be not just your own, but for everybody, right? So it's across everyone. And we're going to create a kind of systematic ethical theory that basically, in my language, I don't use this language, takes the bodily command and makes it rational. So that's utilitarianism. And it's still alive and well. People like Peter Singer or get in the form of consequentialism or whatever. And then another ethical school, the Stoics, they looked at that kinship command and they were like, the problem here is that you are seeing yourself as a citizen of like maybe your family or maybe your city, but you should see yourself as a citizen of like the whole cosmos. And you should see that the real group that you belong to is like the set of all rational beings or the set of beings that are governed by the laws of nature. And And if you, in that way, you're never going to get revenge. The fundamental thing the Stoics were against was revenge. You'll notice. So anger and revenge are the big things that they want to cut out, right? Because the kinship command works if you clean it up in that way. And Kant, right, in the 18th century, he basically says, like, I'm a modern day Stoic, and he is, I don't want to say Kant is just Stoicism. He adds a lot. He does a lot to it. Okay, Kantians are very offended by this. Utilitarians are always fine when I say you guys are just Epicureans, and the Kantians are like, no, Kant created a whole new thing. It has nothing to do with anything. Anyway, no, I mean, he says this too. Kant was was somebody who told you that you should live your life as though you were a member of a self-legislating, ideal, rational community called the kingdom of ends. I mean, this is Stoicism, in my view. It's fancy Stoicism. Okay. And so that's to say, Kant rationalized the kinship command. He's like, kinship is okay. We can make it rational. So in the 20th century, you had basically people who were getting very sick of trolley problems. The trolley problems were these cases where there's a trolley and it's going to hit 5 people, but if you divert it, it will hit only 1 person. And the Kantians, the utilitarians say, of course, divert it. Better to kill, just 1 person than 5. And the Kantians say, no, you're using that person as a means. You're not following a law that could be a law for all rational beings. You're not treating that person with respect. And so, this was like a way to put the tension between these two views. And there's some people who came along and said, we don't want to be thinking of ethics in terms of trolley problems anymore. We're going to go back to Aristotle. And we're going to come up with a new form of ethics that's not about whether you maximize utility or whether you follow the categorical imperative. It is about, do you exhibit the virtues of justice and generosity and wisdom and gentleness, etc. And this is, people like Philippa Foot and Rosalind Hursthouse and Elizabeth Anscombe. These are all the sort of, they were founding a new kind of ethics that's now called sometimes called neo-Aristotelian ethics, sometimes called virtue ethics, and the basic idea here is, well, there's the bodily command and there's the kinship command, and they appear to be in conflict. But actually, if somebody is raised in the right way, then they can be raised to appreciate this thing called the noble or the kalon, the beautiful, where that thing is, on the one hand, always going to be beneficial for the group that you're in. When you behave in the kalon way, it's good for your group. And on the hand, it's the most pleasant thing too. So it's kind of fusion of the pleasant and the responsible into a single concept, which is to say we don't need to choose between them, and we can sort of rationalize them by fusing them. Right. So that's Aristotelianism. Okay, but so all three of this is our menu in the West. This is our menu of ethical theories. This is all we've got. No one's come up with anything beyond these 3 options. Either you're a Kantian, you're a utilitarian, or you're a virtue ethicist. And what I'm trying to do with my book is to say I think there should be a 4th item on the menu, where we actually ask the questions. And I call that intellectualism because, it posits as the goal of life, not maximizing utility, not following the moral law, not exhibiting the virtues, but knowledge. It says the point of life is knowledge. The goal of life is to seek knowledge. And that's a distinctive ethical theory. It gives you a different set of ethical, let's say injunctions about how to live your life. And so that's, that's how, in a way, that's how I pitch my book to like philosophers. I think as far as criticizing, the Kantian strand and the utilitarian strand, I have to just admit, especially to people who haven't read the book, it's not like my book contains some kind of decisive refutations of these views. It doesn't. And I sort of acknowledge that, like, that's another book. That's a whole other book. Really, all I'm trying to do is say there's a viable alternative nobody has noticed. There's a lot to be said for those theories. That is, the people who have and continue to work on them have worked really hard to sort of get rid of all those problems Socrates was criticizing the savage commands for, and they've done a pretty good job. So you can't just dismiss them. But I do want to point to the thought that there is a whole other source of ethical theorizing that we could be looking to.
When you do refute the neo-Aristotelians a little bit, when you go back to Socrates, who thought that one of the greatest forms of ignorance that we have is thinking that we know what just and advantageous kind of mean and how they can be reconciled. He thinks that we are kind of overestimating our capacity to really combine what's good for ourselves and what's good for the group, or that at least we're not seeing clearly. Do you see that as a refutation of the Aristotelian or attempt at combination?
Socrates is denying the distinction between what is really beneficial and what is just. That is, he thinks that what's actually the most just thing is always going to be the most beneficial. That's not the same thing as saying that identifying the bodily command and the kinship command, right? Because the bodily command and the kinship command separate those two things. They tell you, oh no, it's not so great for you if you get killed in the war. But in the fact that Socrates, in a sense, unifies the good, right? He sees the good as one thing. There are no flavors of the good. There are no kinds of goodness. There's no, Martha Nussbaum, the world is full of incommensurable goods that can pull us apart and thus life can be tragic. That's not Socratic view. That kind of anti-tragic view that Socrates has, he actually shares with Aristotle and Kant and the utilitarians. All philosophers deny common sense in this regard. That is, common sense says there are different flavors of the good, and sometimes there's what's good for me, and sometimes there's what's good for other people, and I might be pulled in these two directions. And utilitarians say, well, no, there's just one calculus. There's just do the math, and then you'll figure out what you should do. It doesn't matter that you're you, right? Kantians say, well, you have to universalize your maxim, and you can't make an exception for yourself, right? So in this, and Aristotelians say, look, what's really good for yourself is going to be what's really pleasant is going to be what's also noble. So the craziness of that argument, that's an argument Socrates has with Alcibiades, where Alcibiades is basically like, Socrates, you're insane that you think the beneficial and the just have to go together. All philosophical ethics is crazy in that way. It all flies in the face of common sense.
Wouldn't Socratic intellectualism, what would be the argument for putting Socratic intellectualism under the utilitarian umbrella and saying that it's just maximizing for knowledge?
I think that it's very important to there are versions of utilitarianism where that would work, but it's very important to utilitarianism as it's sketched out by any utilitarian I've ever read, that we know what we're maximizing. It may be a variety of different things. Maybe one person thinks it's pleasure, one person thinks it's happiness, one person thinks it's the high or best kind of pleasure, right? Mill kind of thinks that. But we can't be figuring out what we're maximizing as we maximize it. That doesn't work, because then we can't tell which route actually maximizes, right? And it's pretty important to the Socratic picture that we are figuring out what we do as we're doing it. That is, it's a form of ethics that is addressed. It's sort of like, how should you live if you don't know how to live? That's what Socratic intellectualism is. It's ethics for people who don't know the answers to ethical questions.
It's fossil ethics. Fuck around and find out, right? As the kids say. There you go.
Right, except it would be inquire around and find out. Because it's the problem is that actually, fucking around doesn't teach you anything. It just makes you either do well or screw up. So what you actually need to do is inquire.
Inquire together. I love this. I want to talk a little bit about William James. You devote multiple parts to him. I know he's very important in your thinking. What do we mean when we say Jamesian beliefs? What do you mean by that? And why? Where do beliefs come into play in this whole equation that is Socratism?
So, there's a part of the book where I'm dealing with a tension in the project of inquiry that I think is best expressed by William James. And that tension is that when we're inquiring, if you want to, improve your cognitive state, let's say, there are two things you might care about. One of them is having truths, and the other is avoiding falsehoods. When I first say that, it's going to sound like I just repeated myself. Aren't those the same thing, having truths and avoiding falsehoods? But what James shows is that they're not the same, because if your goal is to avoid falsehood, you could very surely do that by just not believing anything. Suspend judgment and you'll avoid falsehood. And if your goal is to have truths, then you should always have a belief about everything. Just make it up if necessary, because you don't have any chance of having a truth if you don't form a belief, right? And so the person who really wants to have truths is very dogmatic, whereas the person who really wants to avoid falsehood is very skeptical. These are two very different people. But now you kind of have to be both of those people in order to inquire. And what I then argue is that Socrates figured out a really innovative solution to this problem, which is that he said, well, you don't have to be both of those people if two different people can be those people. That is, you can be one and somebody else can be the other one. But I bring in Jamesian beliefs to sort of show you that there are parts of life where we really want to say James is on to something. That is, the thought, look, you just got to have a truth. And so just form the belief. I think it works really well for the belief that you have about what you're intentionally doing. So like, I think that I'm talking to you and I'm doing a podcast right now. And it's true. I want to grant you that I have like sense evidence for this belief, right? So like I can see your face and my computer seems to be working and all of that. But I don't think that my belief that that's what I'm doing is quite, is grounded in the same way on the evidence as like the kind of belief that I have, like that it's not going to rain tomorrow or something like that. Because I kind of need to be using it in order to be talking to you. Like, of course, like I'm not checking to see, am I really talking to you, right? I'm not constantly checking. I'm not looking in the mirror and be like, okay, am I doing the thing I thought I was doing?
I would be really worried if you started doing that. I would be like,
right. So we kind of work on the conceit that we're doing what we think we're doing all the time. Like, you're walking to the supermarket and you think you're walking to the supermarket and like, you're not constantly checking, but am I? And so this is Jamesian beliefs, and he wants to extend it for, those are my favorite Jamesian beliefs. James has its own favorite Jamesian belief. So James's favorite Jamesian belief is belief in God, because he wants to show you that sometimes you need to take a leap of faith. And then I think the examples that he gives are the most compelling are things like when people start to become friends and they, kind of give each other the benefit of the doubt that like, if I'm trying to decide whether I like you and I'm like, well, I'm going to wait and see whether she likes me first. And you say the same thing, then we'll never like each other. Right. And so somebody has to kind of jump. And, James's thought is that in those situations, our beliefs will characteristically outstrip the evidence that we have for them.
I love that. Yeah, the leap of faith, definitely. I find, I do these podcasts and we do, thousands and thousands of interact salons. And James is one of the people that kind of come up the most.
Interesting.
And in the most kind of variable ways. And I'm so touched by that because we don't really, I mean, in Central European thought, he doesn't really feature. And it's
feature in like Anglo-American thought either. Like you're not going to find him taught in most departments.
Oh, that's interesting because in a lot of books that I read, he's kind of there talking about in positive psychology books and in religion books and in cultural history books.
And not analytic philosophy books.
Oh yeah,
that challenge you to find me.
That's so interesting. For me, he's like one of the gifts of America, and American thought. And he's just, every time you encounter some Jamesian utterance, you think this guy is onto something. Like that was kind of his kind of epic attribute. You say this beautiful thing. It made me think so much that fighting is pretend arguing. What do you mean by that? And why is it a subtitle or a subchapter?
So, I think when you're fighting with someone, you're always fighting over something. That is, there's some point of contention between the two of you. She's wrong about this and I'm right about it. And, but when you fight about it, what you do is, instead of arguing about the thing that is the point of contention that you disagree about, you find a way to map it on to some other form of interaction. So in a literal physical fight, it might be like who kills who. But it could also be like who humiliates who, or who convinces a larger group of people to be on their side, or and so my claim is that the sort of original home of the fight is a disagreement that in and of itself does not have a zero-sum structure. That is, if we disagree about something, then one of us is right and one of us is wrong. And whoever is wrong is benefited by being corrected because you learned something. But in a fight, so the loser loses the fight, right? And it's zero sum. In effect, if the fight were able to be the argument that it really is, the loser would win. In the argument, the loser wins. The loser is the one who wins. And so what happens in a fight is that an argument has been perverted or twisted. What I say is politicized, which is to say mapped onto a zero-sum contest, where we're like, okay, symbolically, if this happens, you win the argument, and if this happens, I win the argument. But it's just a symbol. You didn't actually win. It doesn't actually prove you were right. So that's how I understand fighting, and it applies to every kind of fighting. It applies to every kind of political fighting. It applies to everything people call fighting injustice. All of those cases are twisted and perverted, kind of, symbolic mappings of an argument that we're not willing to have.
And Socrates, in your quotation, even thinks that it's more beneficial to be proven wrong than proving somebody else wrong, or even more pleasurable to him because you win so much by finding out that you were wrong about something. And people around him think that he's joking or that he's mocking them when he says this.
Right. And like once you start to see it Socrates' way, you realize the point he's making is like super obvious, right? Like if of two people, only one is going to learn something. Do you want to be the one who learns something or the one who doesn't learn anything? Well, only the one who learns gets to improve, right? So that's the one who was benefited. And so he says it's pleasant because he likes being benefited. It's like, do you like to get money or give it away? He's like, I prefer to get the benefits rather than give them. He's willing to give them, but he's like, but I'd rather be benefited because then I'm getting the good things. And so, when you are refuted, you learn something. Whereas when you refute someone, you just keep thinking the thing you thought before. So nothing changed in your cognitive life.
There's a theory that family members, long marriages, old friends never have a new fight. You have a kind of palette of a very limited number of fights that you keep having and they keep merging into each other. In that case, what are people fighting for in those long relationships?
That's a great claim. I wonder if it's true. But I think that it makes sense to me. I think that the idea would be there was some problem in the relationship that emerged at some point relatively early. They just never dealt with it. And so it keeps getting remapped onto different symbolic territory over and over again. And you keep trying to have it out over, fight this proxy war over the laundry or whatever. And, it doesn't do the trick because you're not actually resolving the underlying issue.
And what should those people do? Say with your sibling, with your spouse, with your mother? Can we turn these relationships more Socratic? Do we benefit from that?
I don't know. So I think, one interesting result of writing about this book is I think it in some way presents itself as an advice book. And then I am saying, actually, I just don't know what you should do because I don't have knowledge, right? Because I'm a Socratic intellectualist, so I'm just inquisitive and I don't have knowledge and I don't know what other people should do. And so it's a funny kind of tension that has emerged. It's a flaw in the book, I think. But
you can't celebrate ignorance and the constant trying to understand things, right? Without admitting that you also have the same problem that everybody else.
Right, right.
Agnes is the wisest in Athens.
But I also think that it's like I think that the only possible resolution of this scenario with your mother or your sister or your spouse or whatever, the only resolution is to have the actual inquiry and to come to some kind of shared understanding about the question that you disagree about. But to say that it's the only possible resolution is not to say that resolving it is what you should do. It's also not to say that that resolution is on offer for you. It's the only possible one, but it might not be possible. That is, it's the only way to resolve it, but maybe you can't resolve it. Maybe your conversation with them is so stuck that if you try, you will just map it onto yet a new territory. Or maybe like, it's sort of like, where are you going to allocate your inquisitive energies? Because it's like all of us are actually in a bunch of these relationships that are stuck in a bunch of different ways, and we can't solve all of these problems. At least we can't solve them all immediately. So it's more a question of like, where do your best options lie? Where do you stand a real chance of coming to approach the issue non-defensively?
I remember this event that you and I did together last year at Yale, right, with Liz Brunig and Jennifer Banks from Yale University Press, and we talked a lot about forgiveness. And one of the things that you said that struck me so much, and it was one of your life-changing sentences for me. You recounted how you and your husband fight, and you said that there's kind of one rule in your fights, which is that when things get really bad, you can't do anything but just say the truth. And I studied war history for a long time, and there's the fog of war. I studied conflict theory before I started interintellect, dialogue science, linguistics, and so much of how we communicate is a kind of manipulation of the other person, or a kind of calculation. Like I will say something, like what you described as well, like we constantly try to, at least in the most benevolent way, manipulate the other person into knowing that we have heard them. But when you're in a really big crisis, you can't calculate because you don't understand the situation, right? When your bodily command is an extreme stress response and fight or flight, you're not going to be at your most eloquent. At least I am definitely not. And I love that there is the comment there is just to say the truth. When I turned 40, I made a vow that I would always speak the truth, and that I would be more truthful. It's not that I was a giant liar beforehand, but just like a normal person, I wanted to be a person. I wanted to become a person who, when asked, I would speak the truth, and I would not use kind of embellishments as much as I did before. And this proved life-changing to me, actually, and in many different ways than what I had anticipated, because I thought it would make my friendships fall apart or something. None of that happened, which is great news, because I think those things are actually grounded on truth. But I become completely allergic to other people's lies in ways that are very, very hard to deal with. And so for me, the whole Socratic method and approaching with playful questions is a kind of way out from some of the outrage that I've sometimes felt in the past year when just encountering people's little lies. So thank you so much for that. My last question before we run out of time is, do you agree that philosophy is training for death? I agree with this. I would be super curious what you think, knowing way more. And you probably also like being way more familiar with ancient Greek than I am, which is zero. Is this something that people should take away from the book? Obviously, this is the hope axis. So we talk about hope. For me, this sentence, philosophy is a preparation for death or preparing for death, is a very hopeful statement. What is your take on it?
So, yes, I think it's true. And I thought it was true before writing the book, but I discovered a new way in which it's true over the course of writing it. And that's really what my chapter ends up focusing on. And it is basically, I noticed that there's two versions of the fear of death. There's the ordinary fear of death, which is just, I want to keep doing the things that I've enjoyed until now. I want to keep reading books and hanging out with my friends and, running salons and going to movies and etc. Right? That's you don't want to miss out on the kinds of goods that you've already been enjoying. They're good and you want to keep having them. So I call that FOMO, fear of missing out. And I think philosophy does prepare you for that, but I think it's less interesting. The one that's really interesting is this other fear of death, and that is the fear of never arriving. So I call it FONA in the book. And it is that there are many things that are worth doing with your life where death might interrupt you. That is, like you want to find a cure for cancer, right? But you're not going to find it probably. Like you want to find a cure for even a specific kind of cancer. You might not do that in your lifetime. So there are projects that are bigger than a human life. And there is a kind of terror in embarking on this project and knowing that you are not going to see it to the end. And I think philosophy is training for this fear, because philosophical questions are just questions that are too big for human life. And to be a philosopher is to sort of, you wake up in the morning and you get into a conversation and you know that you only have maybe an hour to talk about this topic, and you're not going to get to the end of it by the end of the hour. When you start that you won't get to the end, and yet you still do it. You're going to get cut off. That in a way you're going to die, in that sense, right? And so you start it and you do get cut off and you didn't get to the end. And the next day you wake up and you do the same thing again. And that's preparing for death.
I love this. Yes. I like to say that life is like a big feast that you're preparing for other people, and you cook all these courses and you make the hors d'oeuvres and the cake, and it took you so much time. And you know that at some point during this feast, the feast will stop, but you don't know when, and still you want to make all the food and make it beautiful and hope for the best, hope to get to the dessert. This is our hopeful takeaway. Agnes Callard, thank you so much for your time. I know it's late in the evening and you spent it with me. I'm so grateful. People buy Open Socrates, The Case for Philosophical Life. It's really good. And Agnes has one t-shirt. She printed one t-shirt with the cover that you wore throughout your entire book tour every day, which is real commitment and loyalty to Socrates. I think this is an amazing book cover. And if you buy this, guys, it comes with a bunch of very funny stickers as well. So
it doesn't actually. Yours came with the stickers. That's for special people.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel so special.
Yeah. If you buy it from me at an event that I do, whatever, I'll give you stickers. It's just that I was not able to have some deal with the publisher where I literally insert stickers into every copy of the book. I would push for that someday, but I was not able to achieve it this time.
The best way to sell your events. If you want stickers, guys, get your ass to an Agnes Callard lecture or book talk. There will be stickers. Thank you so much, Agnes. This has been an absolute pleasure. And the fact that we are like blouse matching today is an added layer to my happiness. Thank you, everybody who listened to this. Go and be more Socratic. We all need it.